So, in the past year, as I've been on my motorcycle tour, I've had a lot of people ask me, like, how did I do it? How did I plan it? What did I do? A lot of questions about my trip. So, this is your all encompassing video about how to take a solo 1 year motorcycle tour of the Philippines. So the first question is, can you do it? When I first started my trip, I thought it was going to be about 6 months. And I thought I was going to do it basically in one big trip. That turned out to be inaccurate. So it took me 1 year. I arrived in the Philippines on the 28th of August, 2022, and I completed my trip almost exactly a year later on the 28th of August, 2023. But of that 1 year period, 12 months period, I was traveling in the Philippines for about 9 months. So 9 months was basically how long it took me. I was in the United States a couple of times. I went to Thailand several times. So 3 of those months I was gone, but I was traveling for right around 9 months. And I drove about 20,000 kilometers. So, do you have the time? First big question. Okay, you could make your trip smaller. You could only go on Luzon, or you could go around Visayas, or you could only do Mindanao. Okay, obviously, that would make the trip a lot shorter. But if you wanted to do a full tour of the Philippines, yeah, you better figure on around 9 months for the whole drive. You could do it faster, but 9 months. So, does that mean you can't do anything else? Actually, no. I was usually only driving about 3 hours a day, which meant I was basically on the road about 4 hours a day. So that means normally my schedule was I'd wake up at about 6 or 6:30, I'd get ready to go, I'd leave at 7 a.m., and I'd drive for about an hour and a half. I'd stop for a break, maybe some coffee or a 7-Eleven for a drink on the way, drive for another hour or so, have another break, and then finish up my trip. And normally I was driving for 3 hours and on the road for 4 hours. And then I'd get to wherever I was going. Now, in 80% of the time, wherever I was going did have decent internet. So once I got there, I could go to a coffee shop, I could get some Wi-Fi, and I could work. I could work basically all day. So let's say I left at 7 and I arrived at my destination at 11. Well, you have a lot of time for working. So if you work remotely, or if you're working in the evening especially, yeah, it would be pretty easy to work and travel, as I did. I don't have a job that requires me to work 8 hours in a day or anything like that. But I was working, I was emailing, I was messaging people throughout the day whenever I needed to. And so, yeah, I was managing to work and travel at the same time. So, internet is a problem in the Philippines. There are a lot of hotels that don't have decent internet, and a lot of times it doesn't even reach your room, so you have to go to the lobby if you want to use it. That's a hassle. So I had my phone company, my mobile service was TNT, which is like a subsidiary of Smart. There are two major mobile phone companies in the Philippines, to my understanding, Smart and Globe. And then there are other companies like TNT, which operate under those systems. TNT, which I used, was under Smart. And in different parts of the country, they have different coverages. So sometimes I'd be in areas where there was just no smart coverage. And looking back on things in hindsight, I should have had one globe and one smart. And, I have an iPhone, so I can have an eSIM. So I should have done that. And that would have given me better internet. Again, there are usually coffee shops, but not always. And sometimes if you're in the middle of nowhere, you just need internet. So smart and globe. But there are still some places, if you're driving in very rural areas, that have nothing. Like I was at a place up in the north of Luzon at a beach, and it was beautiful and amazing, and I would have stayed for a couple of days, but literally I had no coverage, like nothing. So yeah, so internet's an issue. Get two SIMs, smart and globe. That will really help you. So what should you bring? The easy answer is as little as possible. So I realized I brought too much in the beginning. I ended up with basically one medium-sized backpack, and in that backpack I had my computer, 2 pairs of long pants, 2 pairs of shorts, and 5 shirts and underwear. That's it. And that would fit in a medium-sized backpack. And in my case, because my motorcycle was X-Max, and there's a big compartment underneath the seat, Yamaha X-Max, it fit. So basically all I did was take my backpack, pack it up in the morning, throw it under my seat, and I was good to go. You might be wondering, like, how do you have enough clothes? Well, 2 things. First of all, almost everything I brought was like dry fit. So I had a bunch of like dry fit t-shirts, and sometimes I just wash them in the evening. I'd rinse them out in the sink, I'd use the free shampoo that they give you in a hotel, or I'd buy a bottle of shampoo or something at the 7-Eleven or the convenience store. Sorry is what they call them. I'd, just rinse it out in a sink, hang it up to dry, and by the next morning it was usually dry. I have this one Oregon Duck baseball jersey that I'm wearing all the time because it was really easy to clean, and so I would just clean it and didn't have to worry about too much laundry. But in almost every small town and above, they will have a laundry shop, and generally speaking, you can take your laundry there in the afternoon, and they'll have it done in about 3 hours, and it will cost you, for like my full load, they always say like, oh, well, it's 5 kilos for 200 pesos. I'd only have like 2 kilos because I just have like a couple of pairs of pants and 5 shirts and some underwear, and I'd be wearing a pair of shorts, and it was like 2 kilos, but it didn't matter to me. Okay, 200 pesos. They do all my laundry. I pick it up in 3 hours. It was washed, dried, and folded, and I was good to go. So I usually took my clothes to the laundry shop, maybe once every week or 10 days. And that worked well, and that was pretty easy. Shoes. When I first started driving, I wore my regular Nike running shoes, and I realized after, it took me a while to figure out that it wasn't really a very good option for driving. Maybe motorcycle purists would say, oh, you have to have boots. You have to have something that's like big boots, really protective. Okay, I'm not that kind of guy. I throw caution to the wind, I guess. What I realized was that traditional, normal running shoes are really bad. Why? Because it rains indiscriminately in the Philippines, and suddenly your shoes get wet. Or maybe it's not even raining, but there's some big puddle and your shoes get wet. You never really have a chance to let them dry out completely. And so within a matter of days, your shoes smell like dead animals. And that's generally not a good thing. So it took me actually like a couple of months, because I guess I'm a pretty slow learner, to realize what I really needed to do was go to the market and buy one of these Croc ripoffs. I bought some Croc ripoffs, and those were perfect. Those were amazing. I didn't have any accidents, obviously, in my 9 months of driving. Maybe I'd regret that if I did, but they could get wet, didn't matter. They dry off really quickly. They never smelled like dead animals. So I just basically ended up putting my shoes in my rear box, and I just take them out if I didn't want to wear Crocs. Like, okay, maybe I'm on a date, or I want to dress a little bit nicer and I didn't want to be wearing Crocs. That's when I take out my running shoes, my Nikes. And other than that, I just wore Crocs, because that was way, way better. So what about the kind of motorcycle? Well, I ended up buying an X-Max because I already had an X-Max in Thailand and I really loved it. It's hard for me to say if that was the best decision, because I haven't been on a motorcycle tour in the Philippines with another motorcycle. I would say that the X-Max was great 90% of the time, but there were times when you go down a road and there's a washout and you're literally crossing a river. X-Maxes are a little bit too heavy, and they're specifically made for roads. They are not an off-road or an adventure bike at all. So I made it. It was fine. But in those situations, having some kind of adventure bike would have been better. Then you have the trade-off of storage. Okay, if you could get something else that you could put a big rear box on, and that rear box could hold your backpack, okay, that would work too. Yeah, that would be fine. Although I've never done it. So I really liked the X-Max on the road. It's a great bike. It's 300 cc's. It cost me 195,000 pesos used, and the one I've had 5,000 kilometers on it, so very low mileage. You know, I just went to Facebook Marketplace. I started looking around. I think an NMAX would also be a good choice. It doesn't have as big of a storage, but it does have storage underneath the seat, pretty large storage comparatively. And it has actually a little bit higher clearance. But, you know, maybe one of these kind of adventure street combos that I've seen would be a good bike as well. I can't say definitively. I'm generally happy with my choice of motorcycle, which was X-Max, 300 cc. I had plenty of power to pass people if I wanted to. I could go faster than most people, and that kind of, I think that kept me safe. I could avoid other motorcycles, you know, large vehicles, things like that. If I was going to pass, I passed, and I passed quickly, and that I think gave me some peace of mind. Okay, one more thing about X-Max, which makes me think in hindsight I probably should have purchased an NMAX instead, even though it's a little bit smaller. X-Max is not the most common motorcycle in the Philippines. They have them in the biggest cities, but they don't have them everywhere. Even though they're Yamaha, parts are sometimes hard to find. And for instance, one of my belts, well, I don't remember the name of the belt, but it was like one of the belts in the motor needed to be replaced. And I was in somewhere in northern Mindanao, and I went to the Yamaha shop, and they're like, well, we don't have it, and we don't know when we can get it. So NMAXs are everywhere. If I was going to, in hindsight, choose between NMAX and X-Max, I might choose an NMAX if I was going to do it again, because spare parts are more available. So you can rent bikes in the Philippines, but generally speaking, that's going to cost you like 20,000 pesos per month. And I was thinking it was going to be 6 months. That's 120,000 pesos. I thought that seems pretty expensive. Again, it ended up being a year. That would have sucked. I mean, that's 240,000 pesos, which is more than I paid for the bike. So what I did is I bought a used bike, and then I paid cash for it. I drove it away, and I didn't transfer ownership immediately. Looking back, in hindsight, that was a mistake. There's a rather long process to transferring the ownership of a motorcycle. You need to have the proper documents, you have to have the proper documents notarized, and then you have to have insurance and a health clearance and a few other things. I don't remember right now, but it really complicated the process for me because I ended up transferring the ownership in Davao when I was almost done with my trip. And because the registration was in Manila, where I bought the bike when I arrived, and the transfer was taking place from Davao, it took an extra 2 weeks because they had to send all the documents back up to Manila, and from there they had to check to see if I wasn't using fraudulent documents or whatever. I'm not sure, but that took an extra 2 weeks, which was a mistake. I should have bought the bike, chilled in Manila for a week, gone to the land transportation office. Usually at the land transportation office, just outside, there'll be places that will sell you insurance, that will notarize your documents, that will do everything. So in hindsight, I should have just found my bike, bought the bike, and then transferred ownership right away. I wouldn't have had to worry about if documents were missing or documents weren't good enough. I wouldn't have to worry about dealing with people who are in a different province. I could have taken care of it right away. That's your best option, although it will delay the start of your trip for about a week. Again, I think one of the best places to find motorcycles in the Philippines is just to go to Facebook Marketplace. There's a lot of people use that a lot here, and so it's pretty easy to find bikes, contact the owner, but obviously you're not going to be able to do that much in advance, right? You're going to have to be on your way, just about ready to get on the plane, because no one's going to want to wait for you for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month, and you certainly don't want to be randomly sending money to people that you've never met before. Find the bike that you want right before you go. Maybe find 2 or 3 bikes right before you leave. Show up, check out the bikes, and then decide if you want to buy them, and then stay wherever that is and register them. It'll be much easier that way. Now, the legalities of driving in the Philippines are pretty straightforward. You can drive on your foreign license for 90 days upon arrival. So, in my case, I never stayed in the Philippines for longer than 90 days. As I mentioned, I went back to Thailand multiple times. I think I went back 4 or 5 times. I went to the United States twice. So I was never in the Philippines longer than 90 days. So I never had to worry about that license. But to be honest, in all the time I was driving around in the Philippines for 9 months of driving and 20,000 kilometers, I was only pulled over once to have someone ask me what I was doing or ask to see my driver's license. He looked at my driver's license. He said, "How long have you been in the Philippines?" I said at that time I'd been there for 6 weeks, which was true. He never checked my passport about when I arrived. They were really friendly and really nice, and I didn't ever have any issues with it. But of course, I never actually broke the law by being there for over 90 days, because the rule is 90 days after you arrive, you're free to drive. So I don't think even if you were there for 9 months that it would really be a big deal. But if you were really serious about that, yeah, you should look into getting a driver's license. I never did. I still don't have a Philippine driver's license because I've never been there for. Something that you probably should have would be health insurance. Now, I have Cigna health insurance for expats traveling around the world. And that policy is good for everywhere around the world, including the US. And it's $2,200 per year. Now, if you only had that insurance for the Philippines, it's less. It's like $1,500 per year. Pretty reasonable. But I've got, because I actually normally live in Thailand, I have it so that it's valid everywhere in the world. And so that's $2,200 for me. The Philippines has pretty good health care, but mostly in the bigger cities. Again, I was very lucky in that I never had to see a doctor the entire time I was there. I never had a motorcycle accident. I never had any real issues at all. But I did have insurance just to make sure in case there was something catastrophic that happened that I would be covered. So that's certainly something to think about. But there are travel insurance, and in my case, I got this Cigna insurance for expats that I thought was reasonable. And I have like $1 million coverage on anything, but it's only for inpatient. So the only time I have any coverage is if I go to the hospital, like admitted into the hospital. And then I have really good coverage. But if I just like stub my toe and I want to see the doctor, no, they're not going to cover that. But in the Philippines, you can go to a clinic and it might cost you like $10 or $20 to see a doctor. So it's no big deal for anything that's outpatient. And that's the same with Thailand. And that's why I have this Cigna insurance, because I don't care about inpatient visits. I only care about something catastrophic. So you should think about that. Make sure that you have medical coverage in case something does happen. So what's it going to cost you? My initial investment was in the motorcycle, which I paid about $3,400 for, and I paid cash. I think that was a decent deal for me, but of course I did buy a bike motorcycle that's a little bit expensive. Alexa, convert 3,000 Philippine pesos into US dollars.
3,000 Philippines pesos is about 52 US dollars and 92 cents.
Okay, so I spent about $50 a day on my trip. That included pretty much everything. Hotel, food, gas for the motorcycle. And yeah, that's pretty much everything I was paying for. And okay, $50 a day, all included. Okay, it's not the end of the world. If you're living in the United States, you go through $50 pretty quickly, right? So yeah, $50 a day, it's not that big of a deal. At least for me, maybe for you, yeah. I could have done it cheaper. Let me explain my breakdown of expenses. I tried to find hotels that were 1,000 pesos or less per night. And I could. I'll talk a little bit more about how I find hotels later. But yeah, I could usually find hotels that were right around 1,000 pesos per night. So that would leave me 2,000 pesos for everything else. My actual budget in my mind when I was traveling was 2,500. But I often went over. Sometimes I was under, but I often went over. So I'm just gonna tell you 3,000 because that's probably more realistic. So 1,000 or so went to the hotel, sometimes more, sometimes less. And then food, like gas would cost me about 600 pesos when I'd fill up, but I only filled up every couple of days. So, 2 or 3 days I could drive on that. So that's no big deal. That was only a couple of 100 pesos per day. Food, I would go to Starbucks and nice coffee shops when I can, especially because they would have Wi-Fi and I'd end up buying some drinks and some things there. That's not cheap. Mostly it was the biggest reason why I would go over was from dates, because you can eat for one person pretty cheap, but when you're buying for two people, it doubles the cost. And you might also be going to a little bit nicer place. And in the Philippines, a lot of times when girls are meeting you for the first time, they are sensible enough to bring someone with them. Now, I would always let someone come with the girl that I was meeting, but I would also take them to a little bit less expensive place, because if you're going to a nice place, 3 people really adds up quickly. Okay, if they want to bring their friend with them, then Jollibee is cheap, or some night market street food kind of place. That's the best bet. But again, those were my breakdown on costs, and that's how I spent right around 3,000, about $50 a day. Now, if you, like me, want to do a solo trip, it's so much easier because you never have to negotiate about where you want to go and how long you want to spend your time. It's so nice to go alone. But okay, if you're going to go alone like me, one question you might have is, what's your itinerary and where are you going to go? Honestly, I did almost no planning for this. I knew that when I arrived in Manila, I wanted to go to the east coast of Luzon and then drive up and then loop around and come back down and then head down south to South Luzon. That ended up changing radically for a lot of reasons, mostly because there was landslides in the north and I couldn't go across the north to Pagudpud, which is where I was planning to do. So I ended up backtracking and going through the mountain province, which ended up being super cool. I mean, one of the great things about just traveling alone and not having an itinerary is you just say, okay, well, today I'm going to leave Manila and I'm going to go to Cabanatuan, which is what I did. And it was like 2.5, 3 hour drive. So, okay, I drove to Cabanatuan, I spent the night there, and then hung around in the mall that day and kind of checked out Cabanatuan. And the next day I'm like, well, I want to go to Baler, which is on the beach. So I just drove there. And then, okay, I've been in Baler for a few days. It's kind of cool here, but time to move on. I think I'm going to go to Santiago. Look on the map. Okay, Santiago looks like it's about 3 hour drive. Check Google Maps. Yeah, okay, it's about 3 hours. Okay, so I went to Santiago. And spend a day or two there and then go, well, where should I go next? Well, Digigaraw is about 3 hour drive. So I go 3 hours to Digigaraw and I could stop wherever I wanted to stop. And, if I saw something interesting, I'd hang out there. And it's just a cool way, a fun way to travel with no planning whatsoever. And I didn't do any research on the places I was going. I just get there and kind of check them out. And that turned out to be really interesting for a lot of reasons. Like, people told me I needed to go to vegan. I'm like, okay. Oh, vegan's really nice. Vegan's really cool. You should go to vegan. I'm like, okay. So I go to vegan. No idea why. It's nice and cool and popular. And then I arrive and I realize it's like a 300-year-old Spanish colonial city. Wow, that's pretty cool. Or people are like, oh, you should go to Baguio. You got to go to Baguio. Wow, it's really nice there. And the weather's great. So it ends up that it's like on top of a big mountain. And there's pine trees and the weather's cool and it rains. And so I loved exploring that way, just going somewhere and checking it out and learning when I got there. And that's also a really easy way to meet people, because you go to a coffee shop or you go to a mall and you just talk to people and say, well, so what's cool about Baguio and what's great about vegan and what's interesting around Tigigaraw? And, it's start up a conversation and meet people. So that was a great way to do that. So traveling alone is really convenient. It's really nice. But if you were only alone all the time, that would be boring as hell. So what I always did was I always met people while I was there. And I did meet people just by talking to them in coffee shops or malls, because people are very friendly. And especially if you're in most of the Philippines where there aren't a lot of foreigners around, it's easy to talk to people. They're interested in meeting you and talking to you. Maybe not so much in maybe Dumaguete or Cebu or someplace like that, or even Manila, where I never spent time anyway. But if you're in someplace like Tigigaraw or Bacolod or Tacloban or some other Iloilo, there aren't that many foreigners around. So if you start talking to people, they're going to be very interested in meeting you and talking to you, almost everyone. But most of the time, before I'd go someplace, I'd say, okay, I'm going to Tigigaraw. So what I'm going to do is I blast the social media sites, the dating sites, with just this one cut and paste message. And it just basically said, hi, my name's Bruce. I'm from the United States. I'm on a solo motorcycle tour. I'm going to be coming to Tigigaraw tomorrow or the next day. I don't know anyone. I'm doing this video for my YouTube channel. And if you have time, let's meet. Here's my Facebook. Here's my WhatsApp. Here's my Instagram. And I would just send that to like 50 girls or 100 girls. Just do that for like 15 minutes straight. Paste, 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 paste. Send it off. And then like the next day, I'd have at least 4 or 5 different responses. But I'd have 4 or 5 legitimate responses from people, from girls who would be willing to meet me. So yeah, just say, hey, is there an SM mall there? Is there a Robinson there? Is there a coffee shop there? Let's meet, hang out, and get to know each other. And so, yeah, pretty much everywhere I went, I would meet, a couple of people and, end up hanging out, having a nice time. Sometimes traveling. Oh, are there any cool waterfalls in this area? Are there any nice beaches in this area? Oh, well, when do you have time? Let's go. Let's go tomorrow. And yeah, I did that a lot. And yeah, it made the trip very fun. So how did I find hotels? If it was anything other than a small town, I would use Agoda. And normally they have a red doors, REDDOORZ, I think. Anyway, most places have red doors, which is like some kind of hotel that has an affiliate marketing deal with this company, Red Doors. And you could usually find something for around 1,000 or less than 1,000. So I'd usually get those places. Red Doors would have a pretty standard quality, so it was okay. So that was my first option, usually. If it was a really small town, then maybe they just have 1 hotel or 2 hotels and they wouldn't be listed on Agoda or anything like that. So if that's the case, you just have to go to the town and check out hotels. Oftentimes they'd be a little bit more expensive, like 1,500, let's say, but sometimes less, but usually around 1,500 in a smaller town that's not listed online. And then instead of using Google Maps, I'd use another app, another navigation app called Waze, WAZE. And that's a lot more helpful for doing something like hotels, because if you just type in hotel, it will just list all the hotels and you can drive around and visit them. And if it's a small town, it's usually pretty easy. Now, in some small towns and even in some bigger cities, one of the cheaper places to stay would be the love hotels. And they might have an option for like 3 hours and 6 hours and 12 hours. And okay, sometimes I'd just do that. And like for 12 hours, you might have only like 600 pesos. And okay, you have to pack up all your stuff and take it with you on your motorcycle. But that's another option, like the love hotels. In some of the smaller towns, the really small towns, if you stop in a small town, that's all they have. Like I was driving one day and it just started raining and I didn't want to drive an hour in the rain. It was time that I wanted to stop anyway, so I just stopped in a small town and found the Love Hotel. And it was pretty cheap. And so, yeah, the only thing you have to worry about with a Love Hotel is you might say you want to stay there and they give you a price like 800, but they think it's 800 for 12 hours. And then if you stay there for 3 days, they want to charge you 1,600 a day or something like that. So you have to be careful about that. But okay, so choices. Number 1, I used Agoda, looked for red doors. Number 2, I would just drive to the town and look around. and then find either the local hotel or the Love Hotel. And yeah, generally, I think I was pretty good at keeping my budget to 1,000 pesos overall, just about everywhere I went. Sometimes more, a few hundred more, sometimes a few hundred less. There were times on my trip where I wanted to stay in a city for a longer period of time, like Davao. I spent over 1 week there at one point. And when I was there in a bigger city for a longer period of time, or if it was like more of a tourist area, like Baler in Luzon, the beach area, I also used Airbnb. That worked too. It just depended. Sometimes hotels were cheaper. I really liked Airbnb when I had the chance to use it and the price was comparable, or sometimes it was even less expensive. Like I was staying in a place in Davao, and it was only like 750 pesos per night for a 1-bedroom condo on Airbnb, and I had my own kitchen, which was amazing because I could cook my own food. I'd go down to SNR, the big like kind of Costco equivalent. I'd buy beef and I'd fry beef. They complained that their kitchen was kind of dirty when I left, which it was, but I could fry my own steaks all the time. That was great. Made the kitchen very greasy. But Airbnb is another really good alternative in certain situations. So how did I handle money? Okay, this is how I did it. First thing I did was I created an account from Wise, WISE.com, which is an international banking and money transferring service. And I created that in advance, and I ordered one of their debit cards. And so that's how I handled most of my money. When I arrived in the Philippines, I got a SIM card, and then I registered a GCash account, and that made life pretty easy for receiving money and then spending money. A lot of places in bigger cities and towns will accept money payments via GCash, and GCash is like a Philippine app that you can pay for things with. You know, you put in the phone number or you scan a QR code, and then you just type in the amount and transfer them the money, and that's easy. So I would either use my Wise account where I had some money in that Wise account, and I would transfer money into my GCash account, Philippine pesos from US dollars or euro, into my peso GCash account. That would only take like an hour, and the fees were almost nothing, and the exchange rates were quite good. So that was one of the main ways. Now with my GCash, if I go to a local shop that's GCash in and out, I can actually get money out, but there's like a 2% charge. Another way that I handled money was using my own debit card from Thailand and the United States. And as long as you go to an international bank, like one of the big national banks, not a local or provincial bank, but one of the big national banks, you can use your ATM card and you can withdraw money. One of the problems with that is that you can usually only withdraw 10,000 pesos, and there's a 250 peso fee for that. So that's 2.5%. I wasn't thrilled with that, but okay, there aren't a lot of other options. At least those are the options I thought were best. So those are the options that I chose. Some of the money I would transfer into GCash. Some of them I would always keep some cash with me. You do need cash because there are some places that don't accept GCash. So I always had some cash with me. I'd go to the ATM, I'd withdraw 10,000 out, either from my Wise account or from my US or Thailand bank accounts using my ATM. So internet is a problem in the Philippines. There are a lot of hotels that don't have decent internet, and a lot of times it doesn't even reach your room, so you have to go to the lobby if you want to use it. That's a hassle. So I had my phone company, my mobile service was TNT, which is like a subsidiary of Smart. There are two major mobile phone companies in the Philippines, to my understanding, Smart and Globe. And then there are other companies like TNT, which operate under those systems. TNT, which I used, was under Smart. And in different parts of the country, they have different coverages. So sometimes I'd be in areas where there was just no Smart coverage. And looking back on things in hindsight, I should have had one Globe and one Smart. And, you know, I have an iPhone, so I can have an eSIM. So I should have done that. And that would have given me better internet. Again, there are usually coffee shops, but not always. And sometimes if you're in the middle of nowhere, you just need internet. So Smart and Globe. But there are still some places, if you're driving in very rural areas, that have nothing. Like I was at a place up in the north of Luzon at a beach, and it was beautiful and amazing, and I would have stayed for a couple of days, but literally I had no coverage, like nothing. So yeah, so internet's an issue. Get two SIMs, Smart and Globe. That will really help you. So I think this has been a pretty comprehensive discussion of what I did and what I needed to travel in the Philippines for almost a year. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it's useful. If you have any more questions or comments, just leave them below. And thanks again for paying attention. So join me on this adventure. Let's go.